Picture this. It's April 1944, southeastern England. A young American signals operator sits completely alone in a cramped, freezing wooden hut. It's well past midnight. He puts on his headphones, adjusts his dial, and starts tapping his Morse key. Now here's the crazy part. He's sending an urgent message from a tank battalion that absolutely doesn't exist to a headquarters that was never built for an army that exists entirely on paper. And somewhere across the English Channel, highly trained German intelligence analysts are listening to every single tap, mapping out this massive American force and falling headfirst into the greatest trap in military history. Welcome to this explainer on World War II's secret radio war.
Section 1. The problem. You can't fake an army with silence.
So here's the deal. The Allies had a massive problem on their hands. They desperately needed to hide Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion force. But a real invasion force of 1 million men generates a staggering river of radio traffic. We're talking logistics, artillery, weather reports. It's a continuous, deafening wall of electronic noise. You can't just tell everyone to go completely silent to hide the army, because the Germans would instantly know you were up to something. And the German listening service, known as the Horstdienst, they were terrifyingly good at their jobs. They didn't even need to break your codes to know exactly who you were. They listened to something called the operator's fist. You see, every single radio operator develops a unique, personal style when tapping Morse code. The speed, the spacing, the tiny human hesitations. It's exactly like recognizing a friend's handwriting. German analysts had spent years mapping these out. They could track an entire Allied division just by recognizing the distinct fists of the guys tapping the keys.
To solve this seemingly impossible problem, Allied signals engineers basically built an entire ghost army out of thin air and radio waves. They called it the First United States Army Group, or FUSAG, and they pulled this off in 3 brilliant steps. First, they invented a massive, highly detailed fake organizational structure. Second, they placed hundreds of transmitters exactly where they mathematically should be, and they paired them with fake logistics. We're talking inflatable rubber tanks, so German reconnaissance pilots would look down and see exactly what they heard on the radio. Just imagine it, an entire fake army made of balloons. Finally, and this is the best part, they trained a brand new cadre of radio operators with fake service histories to intentionally mimic realistic human errors. They literally taught them to screw up just enough to make the lies feel perfectly authentic.
Section 2. Trolling the German Wehrmacht and the birth of black radio.
While the Americans were meticulously faking an army out in the English countryside, a British journalist named Septon Delmer was taking a much darker, way more aggressive approach. Delmer was running phantom black radio stations, like Sodeton Sender Calais, and his strategy was just pure, brilliant sabotage. He would hook German troops who were bored out of their minds on garrison duty by playing popular jazz and dance music, stuff the official Nazi stations had actually outlawed. Then, right between the smooth tunes, his friendly announcers would casually drop absolutely devastating, highly specific news. Exact street names of hometowns in Germany that had just been flattened by Allied bombers. Cholera and typhus outbreaks in German refugee camps. Oh, and my personal favorite, highly detailed step-by-step instructions on how a German soldier could safely desert his post without getting caught.
And Delmer, the guy had absolute nerve. Let's rewind slightly to 1940, back when the German army was threatening to invade Britain across the English Channel. Delmer broadcast this helpful little English lesson directed straight at the German amphibious troops waiting on the French coast. He had them repeat phrases over the radio. Quote, "Das Boot sinkt," the boat is sinking. "Das Wasser ist kalt," the water is cold. "Wir brennen," we burn. He was just casually implying that the British had flooded the English Channel with petrol and were ready to burn the German invasion fleet alive. It was completely made up. There was no petrol trap, but it absolutely terrified the waiting troops.
Unhindered by the BBC's strict rules of truth and decency, this black propaganda became a frankly terrifying weapon. Because it sounded exactly like a legitimate German military station, it became a serious rival to Nazi home radio. They would deliberately mislead U-boat commanders far out in the Atlantic by reading the names of destroyed submarines and dead crewmen, completely ruining German morale. Goebbels, the head of the Nazi propaganda ministry, was practically powerless to stop it.
Section 3. Deadly Dutch Radio Games. The Ground War.
Now, we have to pivot from the witty high-tech deception in England to the stark, terrifying reality on the ground in occupied Europe. Because while spoofing a radio signal in Sussex was a neat engineering puzzle, simply turning on a radio receiver in the occupied Netherlands was an instant death sentence. During the brutal Dutch hunger winter, everyday citizens like Theo Ebo were fighting a completely different kind of war. Theo built these tiny, crude crystal sets by hand. He and his father would trade these homemade receivers to local farmers just to get enough food to survive. And why? Also, they could secretly listen to Radio Orange broadcasts from London. Getting caught with one meant execution.
But the Dutch resistance needed more than just receivers, right? They needed to talk back. So brilliant Dutch engineers like Jan Thijssen and J.P. Heijboer, operating under an internal intelligence service known as the OD, risked absolutely everything. They built clandestine transmitters hidden in attics and basements using smuggled Philips electronics parts. They were desperately trying to maintain a critical link with the exiled Dutch government in London, but every single time they tapped a key, they knew German direction-finding trucks were hunting them in the streets outside.
And sadly, the German intelligence apparatus in the Netherlands was incredibly lethal. The brilliant German Abwehr, led by Major H.J. Gieskes, completely flipped the script on the Allies. They captured Allied radar beacons and clandestine operators and launched devastating Funkspiel, or radio games. They would literally put a gun to a captured Dutch agent's head and force them to operate their transmitter, feeding perfect, authenticated lies straight back to headquarters in London.
This led directly to one of the greatest intelligence disasters of the entire war, a catastrophic compromise known as Operation North Pole. Because London believed the radio signals were coming from free agents, the German Abwehr was able to trick the Allies into dropping over 50 secret agents, alongside tons of weapons and explosives, directly onto drop zones where the Gestapo was patiently waiting to arrest them. It's a haunting reminder that in the radio war, deception cut both ways and the cost was measured in human lives.
Section 4. The ultimate D-Day lie. The turning point.
Okay, let's jump ahead to June 1944. Everything we've talked about builds to this massive, high-stakes test on the beaches of France. June 6th arrives. D-Day hits Normandy. Now, you'd think the Ghost Fusog network in England would finally drop the act, right? But no, they do the exact opposite. They drastically spike their radio traffic. They start mimicking an army group holding in reserve, preparing for a second, even larger invasion. They are basically screaming into the ether. Normandy is a distraction. We are the real army and we are coming for Pas de Calais.
The Germans are hearing this massive radio spike, sure, but they need human confirmation before they commit their forces. Enter Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Garbo is a legendary double agent who had spent years feeding the Germans intelligence from a completely fabricated spy network in Britain. He literally just made it all up, and the Germans trusted him implicitly. So on June 9th, Garbo sends an urgent message confirming the radio traffic. He tells the Germans, yes, the Ghost Army is real, and the main attack is definitely still coming.
Because of those Fusog radio illusions, perfectly locked together with Garbo's human confirmation, Adolf Hitler makes a truly disastrous decision. He holds back the deadly 12th SS Panzer Division. He keeps his heaviest, most destructive armor frozen in place, waiting for a ghost army that is just never going to arrive. The tanks stay put. Their fragile, bloody Allied beachhead in Normandy survives. The deception worked absolutely perfectly.
Section 5. Consequences. Weapons of mass deception.
So, what's the big takeaway here? How does a fake army of radio operators fundamentally change the world? Well, the events of World War II permanently changed radio from a simple tool for talking into a formalized weapon of psychological and electronic warfare. Every military power emerged from the 1940s realizing that the pattern, the volume, and the rhythm of radio waves were just as important as the actual words being spoken. This exact dynamic, managing electronic signatures and spoofing enemy sensors, would go on to violently shape Cold War intelligence doctrine for the next 50 years.
And it leaves us with a pretty chilling realization about the nature of conflict. The most effective military deceptions in history aren't built on what you want to hide. No, they're built precisely on what your enemy expects to find. The Germans expected a massive army aimed at Calais, so the Allies built a radio ghost that gave them exactly that. It proves that sometimes the deadliest weapon on the battlefield isn't a bomb or a tank. It's an invisible wave of sound and a perfectly engineered lie.